The Justice Department, or as Trump so dramatically dubbed it, the Department of Injustice. You know, just that phrase alone raises so many questions about how we perceive our public institutions. Let me start with his speech itself. Here we have a sitting president accusing the DOJ and by extension its officials of outright corruption, calling prosecutors scum, judges corrupt, and spinning a narrative of personal persecution. These aren't casual criticisms. They're incendiary. Play this clip.
As the Justice Department being politicized against him. But on Friday, he gave a very political speech at the agency's Great Hall. He said he was, quote, turning the page on 4 long years of weaponization at the DOJ and launched into a list of grievances about investigations into him with promises of punishment for those responsible.
We had to take all of that abuse, even during the trials. We had to take tremendous abuse, like, these wonderful guys. They're not legitimate people. They're horrible people. They're scum. And you have to know that. What a difference a rigged and crooked election had on our country when you think about it. And the people who did this to us should go to jail. They should go to jail.
CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig is a former assistant U.S. attorney, former state and federal prosecutor. Ellie, good to see you. I know you worked at DOJ for many years. What was your response to this speech?
Well, Jess, it was a debacle, and that's a universal sentiment, I can tell you, among past and present DOJ prosecutors. First thing it's important to understand, that crowd yesterday in the Great Hall at Justice Department headquarters, that was not the usual crowd you would see at a speech by an AG or the rare speech by a president. That was not rank and file prosecutors like I once was. There were a few there, but generally that was a curated crowd, largely filled with political supporters of Donald Trump. And what the president did is he walked into the Justice Department. He spent about an hour airing his own personal grievances, giving a sort of political stump speech, and really tearing down the very institution itself. And if we look at Donald Trump's premise, his key premise, you could see it in those clips that we just saw, is that he was treated unfairly by prosecutors. Let's grant that some of that is true. I certainly was outspoken. I believe some of the prosecutions against him were handled improperly. But his response to that is not, and we should make sure that that never happens again. His response to that is, now I get to do that to other people. And I think that's the fundamental problem, to inject politics and vengefulness in the way Donald Trump did. That's why I think any DOJ prosecutor, past or present, you speak to will tell you that that was a disgrace.
Let's break this down. Trump painted himself as the ultimate victim, claiming prosecutors targeted him for political gain, calling out individuals like Judge Aileen Cannon. Now, why mention Cannon? It's interesting, isn't it? He praised her, even though her rulings in his favor faced criticism for appearing biased. This taps into a broader question. When public figures speak so scathingly about legal authorities, does it erode our collective trust in the justice system? I mean, that's not some fluffy rhetorical question. This is the heart of democracy itself. If judges or prosecutors are seen as politically driven, people start looking at the legal system like it's, well, just another branch of partisan politics. And then there's his language, the name calling, those harsh phrases like radicals and hacks. Honestly, when you publicly humiliate individual prosecutors and judges, isn't there a danger that it sets a precedent? That others might think it's okay to vilify the very people tasked with upholding the law? Think about what that does to judicial independence. If judges feel politically pressured, will they rule with fairness or out of fear? What's fascinating, too, is how much he focused on grievances about the 2020 election, an election that every investigation has consistently found to be free and fair. Yet he repeated again those baseless allegations of a rigged system and used it to justify his narrative of injustice. This approach shifts the burden of proof, painting any opposition he faces as part of a conspiracy. The real-world impact of that, I think, is monumental. It plants doubt where there might not even be soil for it to grow. But here's where the real damage happens. When the public sees this kind of attack on the judiciary, it delegitimizes one of the most foundational principles of democracy, the rule of law. If our justice system can't be trusted to act impartially, who benefits? Really, who benefits from people believing that their grievances will go unheard and justice will be unfairly served? Certainly not us as ordinary citizens. Let's dissect another major element here: Trump's relentless attacks on media outlets like CNN and MSNBC, his labeling of them as corrupt, and even going as far as calling their reporting illegal. Now, step back and think about this. When a sitting president brands key media outlets as not just biased but criminal, what message does that send? It's not just rhetoric. It has real consequences for how the public receives and trusts information. So here's the big question for us to grapple with. Is this just about media bias, or is it a calculated strategy to delegitimize critical voices entirely? Because if you target journalists as an extension of political opposition, you blur the line between genuine accountability and outright suppression. Remember, the press is often referred to as the fourth estate for a reason. It's meant to be a watchdog, not a lapdog. But it doesn't stop there. Trump's administration moved beyond words, investigating journalists, restricting access for press pools, canceling government subscriptions to certain outlets. It reeks of an attempt to control the narrative, shaping what the public can and cannot hear. And really, if press freedom gets curtailed this way, doesn't it undermine the First Amendment itself? If freedom of the press gets curtailed away, how is the U.S. any different from other communist societies? Thus, I am thankful for the rise of independent media. Then there's the claim he made that the media influences judicial decisions by pressuring judges with negative coverage. Now, while judges are indeed human and can feel the weight of public scrutiny, the suggestion that reporting undermines the judiciary's integrity is troubling. It's as if he's implying that the problem isn't with judicial processes, but with the very act of holding those processes accountable. Isn't that a form of deflecting criticism? We need to ask ourselves whether this collision of media rhetoric and judicial commentary creates yet another layer of distrust. If people begin to question not just what the media reports, but the motives behind the reporting itself, or believe that judges are swayed more by headlines than hard evidence, where does that leave us? That mistrust isn't contained. It spills over into every aspect of democracy. Now let's dig into the heart of what these threats against political adversaries and even the judiciary itself mean for our democracy. Trump has repeatedly leaned on rhetoric, suggesting his opponents should be prosecuted or even jailed. And on its face, that's a challenge to the idea of judicial independence. A functioning democracy depends on a separation of powers, and when the executive branch starts leaning on the judiciary for political gains, well, that's dangerous territory. The U.S. is in disarray. People are being fired without cause. People cannot afford the simple things in life like groceries. We are battling trade wars. Americans are losing their Social Security and access to health care. But Trump, the sitting U.S. president, has time to launch an attack on whom he deems to be personal enemies. I mean, look at his praises for judicial figures like Aileen Cannon. Trump applauding Cannon for decisions that favored him feels less about celebrating legal acumen and more about reinforcing his narrative that the system only works when it works for him. But don't forget, lawmakers like Representative Jamie Raskin have been vocal about his actions eroding judicial norms. The independence of these judges is what protects us all, whether we agree with specific rulings or not. Once you lose that independence, rulings could become, transactional instead of just. And it goes deeper. Trump's rhetoric, like painting certain prosecutors as enemies or dismissing cases against his allies as illegitimate, introduces an unprecedented level of executive overreach. It's exactly what the founders of this country tried to prevent. They built a system where law would serve as a counterweight to power. That's why John Locke's words resonate so loudly. Where law ends, tyranny begins. By challenging the judiciary's autonomy, isn't that essentially ignoring the boundaries set by the law? So what does this mean for us, the people? It's not just theoretical. If the judiciary gets tangled up in political machinations, who's left to ensure fairness and accountability? Judiciaries aren't like us. They don't respond to polls or public opinion. They're supposed to follow the law and only the law. When that gets undermined, when rulings are critiqued based on allegiance rather than principle, we risk dismantling the very structures that protect individual rights. To leave you with something to reflect on, consider this. Democracy isn't self-sustaining. It requires vigilance, trust in fair institutions, and accountability applied equally. If we tamper with those scales of justice, if we normalize the idea that our leaders can dictate judicial outcomes, then what we're left with might not be a democracy at all. And that should concern all of us. That wraps up today's episode of The Real 411. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for tuning in and for your continued support. It means more than you know. If you found value in today's discussion, please drop a comment, follow us on all social media platforms, and let us know what topics you'd like to see us cover next. Be sure to sign up for our email newsletter so you never miss an update or exclusive insight. And if you believe in independent media, media that digs deeper and dares to tell the truth, please consider following The Real 411 on Substack and Fanbase. We offer both free and paid subscriptions, and your support helps us continue producing content that informs, empowers, and sparks real conversation. Thanks again for being part of this journey. Because remember, the story is never just the headline. Until next time, stay informed, stay bold, and stay real.